Our presentation will discuss the definition of dirty work and its implications upon society. We will also explain and explore the different types of dirty work and how they affect an employee's sense of identity, which has associations with their perceptions of self-worth and place within society. Dirty work is a form of employment that carries a type of stigma associated with a kind of dirt. This can be physical, social, or emotional. The element of dirt is often disgusting to the general population, alongside elements of degradation which affect an employee's dignity. Dirty work also remains poignant due to its contrast to the idyllic, utopian narrative of employment that is often delivered and reiterated to children. It also has foundations in other social issues, such as racism, sexism and classism, which affect the occurrence of dirty work as well as the perception of the employment by the dominant culture. Hence, its additional place as a culturally specific issue, as what is considered dirty work is completely dependent on what a culture decides is tainted, resulting in inconsistencies of dirty work across cultures and groups. This also demonstrates why definitions of what is dirty work are constantly changing, alongside perceptions of dirt, which when transcribed into society add different labels to varying forms of employment, addressing them as tainted whilst also changing the group who are categorised as dirty workers. This has further consequential effects on the perceived definition of dirty work.
The term dirty work refers to tasks or occupations that are likely to be seen as disgusting and degrading. The concept of dirty work was first introduced by Hughes. Hughes defines dirty work as physically, socially, and morally tainted. According to McMurray and Ward, the three taints introduced by Hughes were not enough to define dirty work, and thus they introduced a fourth type of taint, which is emotional taint. There are various occupations that are considered as dirty work. A few examples include cleaner, meat cutters, undertaker, waitress, abortion or GT nurses, security work, and sex shop workers. Some of these will be discussed in detail later on.
Stigma is defined as an attribute that is deeply discrediting and reduces an individual from a usual person to a discounted one. It is argued that occupational stigmas may be damaging to the worker's identity. Therefore, workers that live with the stigma of job taint often reframe, recalibrate, and refocus the dirty aspects of their job to narrate positive aspects and values of their job. For example, the role of a gynecological nurse is seen as both significant and honorable as their job looks at the complications surrounding childbirth. Traditionally, men prefer work that incorporates manual labor and strength as to emphasize their masculinity. Therefore, they often do not consider nursing as their kind of job, as a nursing job is often described as an effeminate role. Male nurses are often viewed as homosexuals even though they themselves are heterosexual. As part of the nursing job, nurses are required to engage with tasks that are viewed as unpleasant and undesirable, the tasks that doctors often do not want to handle because of the dirt. For example, genetic termination nurses have to handle tasks like cutting umbilical cord and delivering placenta, essentially tasks that involve blood or bodily fluid. In 2005, Bolton argued that due to the job, genetic termination nurses are physically, socially, and morally tainted. Genetic termination nurses are physically tainted due to the association with bodies and death, socially tainted through the contact with the topic of pregnancy termination, and morally tainted because this job is now rendered openly. There is very little emotional support for these genetic termination nurses, as the public are uncomfortable with the concept of genetic termination, resulting in the nurse often feeling isolated. In addition, genetic termination is seen as a secrecy topic, and so their work is not as widely recognized as other branches of nursing. There is a double standard in the healthcare workfield as well. Tasks that are dull and involve actual quote-unquote dirt are often being passed from the doctors to nurses because they just simply don't want to do it. However, doctors get the credits in the end. Even though nurses are the one who care and deal with the patients most of the time, their occupation is criticized as dirty.
Hughes claimed that dirty work are tasks that are physically, socially, or morally tainted. However, he didn't expand on what these meant. Thus, by looking at other research, we are going to be discussing these 3 taints of dirty work in more detail. Blake Ashforth and Glenn Kreiner explored the work completed by Hughes in much more detail by giving clarification for these concepts. They defined physical taints as being directly associated with waste, death, or work that is done under unpleasant or dangerous conditions. Therefore, according to this definition, some examples of occupation that consist of physical taints include being a butcher, a cleaner, an undertaker, garbage collectors, and police officers. Taking the role of police officers into more depth, this consists of an occupation which can be considered as being dirty, but this could be quite controversial to some, as the role is arguably classed as quite respected in the attempt to effectively keep society safe from numerous crimes and criminally deviant people. However, according to the definition given by Ashforth and Kreiner, these individuals are in the presence of dangerous situations with these potential criminals, and therefore the occupation is classed as physically dirty. The work of Mary Douglas in her book Purity and Danger conveys that there is a social significance with all social and moral taints in particular, but can also relate to the physical taints of dirty work. Her ethnographic research saw that a high proportion of society correspond being dirty with being bad, and being clean with being good. These findings inevitably led to occupations which was classed as dirty as having an automatic and unconscious stigmatization against them. As well as this, the individuals doing these jobs were also classed as being dirty or polluted. This relates to the concept of occupational prestige, which interprets ranks or ratings which society used to distinguish and evaluate the hierarchy of jobs in regards to their social position. Similarly, Sue Ellen Hoy talks about the historical emergence and increase in societal attention on the topic of hygiene and cleanliness within society throughout the 19th century and onwards. She establishes a link between societal views on dirt and being contaminated or diseased, and therefore, like Rosa Douglas's work, there is an inevitable negative perception of those in contact or having any relation to dirt, which leads to distancing from these people and jobs. This leads to more of a distance between the people in these jobs due to the stigma, such as working in a slaughterhouse, as seen in the research conducted by Hamilton and McCabe. Their ethnographic study on dirty work within a chicken factory establishes that there is more of a tendency to see workers who have migrated to the UK doing these jobs due to the stigma of these roles, which deters others from doing them. I have some experience of being a part-time cleaner at a small local restaurants on weekends, which I believe relates directly to the topic of dirty work. There's obvious physical taint surrounding the job, as it consists of clearing the mess of others, disposing of leftover food and waste, scrubbing at stains, cleaning unsanitary toilets, mopping dirty floors, and so on. An observation I made was that the presupposition that dirty work was generally consisted of lower earning jobs was indeed confirmed in this line of work in particular, and in line with my experience that I had, as everyone who had the same job role was getting paid just over minimum wage, and there was not really many opportunities to progress in the company due to the variances in job roles available. As well as this, there was a female-dominated workforce for the cleaners, which lives up to the ideology that domestic work should be done by this gender in particular. Therefore, some people might not class this as line of work as dirty, due to there being an assumption that women are kind of made to do these kind of jobs. However, if it was a male in this situation, they might class this work as more dirty and degrading, as there's ideology that men are supposed to do jobs that show their machismo and masculinity. The attitudes within the workforce of the cleaners was generally pretty positive. This might have been the case due to the workforce being relatively small, so there's more opportunity to get to know each other and develop relationships and sort of develop a workforce culture within the organisation. Due to the facility being a restaurant, hygiene and health
and safety was inevitably at the top of the priority list for the establishment, and this could only be kept intact from the cleaners, so from what we do and from our line of work. Therefore, we did see our role as being quite important to ensure the satisfaction of customers, and therefore the high profits within the company, even though the stigma of the occupation was overlooking us. These values support academics such as Ashforth and Kreiner and Trice and Baer, who suggest that members who participate in these dirty work roles collectively secure a positive outlook on the occupation through holding strong cultures within the workplace.
Social taint is faced when a task or occupation involves a servile relationship to others or a regular contact with stigmatized people. Experiences and meanings of workers may vary, therefore what is considered tainted depends on the different cultures, subcultures and embodied identity characteristics of workers such as gender, class, race or nationality. For instance, some dirty tasks or occupations may be seen by native workers as undesirable but are considered as acceptable for migrant workers. An example of socially tainted job is private security guard. This is socially tainted because security officers are required to manage stigmatized people and they need to behave in a servile manner to both the employers and the customers.
I worked for over a year in a family-owned bakery on a high street within a small town. Although I did many of the same jobs as Sammy, cleaning and such, I also handled raw food and leftover waste, as well as working on the shop floor and dealing with customers. However, my job to many would not be considered dirty, despite it dealing with very similar aspects as other dirty work. This could be attributed to the fact that the title of the job itself does not carry connotations of tainted employment. Due to the job title, the work sounds better than it actually is and does not allude to the work it actually involves, having a positive effect on the social acceptability the job holds. Also, the contact with the customers made it perceived as higher class work than it was, due to the first contact with customers being one of a non-perceived form of dirty work. Stigmatised work in the background could be ignored, especially within the town where the bakery was, where it was considered a staple to the customers, and a relationship could be built up between the employees and the customers, making the work a more entrenched necessity of a daily life for the town goers.
Another characteristic of dirty work is the moral taint that is associated with it. This kind of taint is work that is considered to be immoral or dubious. Through the perception of the work, as well as those involved, certain occupations are seen as lower standard. Moral taint reduces occupational prestige, and this is exacerbated by public perception. Sex work is a common example of dirty work that carries moral taint. Tyler's work on Soho sex shops illustrates the different taints associated with this type of work, and how this leads to moral panic. It is stigma attached to both the selling and consumption of sex that adds to the negative perception of sex work. Tyler discusses in her work how the commercialisation of sex raises physical, social and moral issues because it does not fit with social norms. Emotional taint is work that requires an employee to perform certain emotions, such as smiling, even if this does not fit with their current mood. Work involving emotional labour is perceived as low status due to its close relation to service occupations. Emotional labour is also believed to be more female work because women are seen to portray the required emotions more easily than men, and as a result, men are less comfortable expressing them. Consequently, men are particularly uncomfortable with expressing these emotions in the workplace as they do not conform to the stereotypically traditional identities of men.
Based on my past experience of working as a trainee waitress, I can identify some dirt aspects of the job. Firstly, the physical aspects included the handling of food waste and dirty dishes, as well as cleaning both the floor and the tables frequently. Secondly, the social aspects included working really long hours and overtime with a very minimal wage pay. Lastly, the emotional aspect of the so-called dirt was maintaining a positive facade throughout the working day because it is part of the customer service despite the actual emotion I felt at that time.
A major criticism of dirty work is the social construction of the completely subjective definition of dirty. Each culture has a different definition of what is considered dirty, which affects this whole subject of what is considered dirty employment. The specific taints are individual and for the most part non-transferable between cultures, which affect perceptions of dirty work. Concepts of dirt change so that whilst one group may consider the employment to be stigmatised, other groups will not. Finally, the constantly changing specifications of what is considered dirty and the continuing concealment of what can be considered tainted work results in an inability to measure the effects of dirty work socially and emotionally, due to hidden aspects of employment, individual coping mechanisms, and additional forms of wage.
For trainee waitress, I've mentioned physical, social, and emotional taints in the previous slides. The physical aspects included handling food waste and cleaning dirt in general. Secondly, the social aspects included I had to work really long hours with very minimal wage pay. And lastly, the emotional aspects of the dirt was I had to maintain the required emotion by the managers for customer service, that therefore I had to ignore the emotion I felt at that time.
In the bakery, I talked about the fact that there's a lot of social taint and the fact that for some of the aspects it's considered a better job, even though it contains pretty much similar aspects as like waitressing and cleaning, but because it's in a bakery and the job title's different, it's considered a better job than what it is, and that has a big impact on whether or not what you do is considered dirty work and whether or not it's considered like a part of a community almost. Because it was such a small town with not very many people, it was seen as like a major part of daily life and other aspects of the community. Yes, they make a difference to the stigma in that they encourage it so as to keep being able to use certain groups of society for dirty work, such as minorities, for work that most of the population might consider below them. Hiring minorities allows them to reduce costs of labour because they can use lower wages and zero-hour contracts, whilst also reinforcing perceptions that low-skilled work is being performed by overseas workers. This also reinforces the perceptions of women within the labour market, as they're often segregated to low wage and low skill employment.
Organisation techniques can also help the workers by improving conditions of pay, but in the end there is a reason why it is considered dirty work. To a certain extent, the poor perception and stigma will remain. When there are little options for employment and few alternatives are available, or worse ones, are there then the need for employment overrules all other factors that determine the negatives of employment?
In our opinion, additional work rewards such as bonuses and work visas, as shown in Lindsay's Chicken Factory study, do affect the stigma felt by employees, as they can act as additional forms of wage to them, which improves the work experiences and reduces the consequence of stigma. Socially, the stigma is still apparent, as society are not aware of the additional work rewards, and therefore are still based on entrenched understandings of dirty work and the elements it involves, which affect perceptions of certain forms of employment. Finally, the changing definition of dirty work means that work rewards must be continuously adapted to remain current, so as to act as a work reward, so as not to become an additional stigma upon dirty work.